They say real countrymen don't cry, but Roy Chandler learned there are betrayals even the dust of the road can't swallow. Raised among fine roosters, dry pastures, and values passed from grandfather to father, he was the kind of man who didn't need many words to say what he felt. He loved his wife, trusted his best friend, and never imagined life could turn its back on him in a single day, but that's exactly what happened. The ranch he built with his own hands, the land he watered every morning, even the house he made from timber and grit, all of it was taken away. His wife, Evelyn, had been secretly seeing Martin Hayes, Roy's childhood friend. Together, they forged documents, sold the land, and mortgaged everything behind his back. By the time Roy found out, there was nothing left, no home, no cattle, no dignity. But some things can't be sold. His old horse Buck, his loyal rooster Red, 3 hens still laying eggs, and a rickety wooden wagon that creaked with every mile. With that and a broken but beating pride, Roy hit the road. He didn't know where he was headed. He just knew he couldn't stay where everything smelled of lies. And so began his journey, with his heart in pieces, but his head held high. Hello my friends, I'm Roger, your storyteller from the Country Life Rural Stories channel. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Our story today is The Last Rooster of Old Man Roy, a wagon, 3 hens, and a betrayed heart. Roy Chandler woke up the same way he always did, before the rooster crowed, with the smell of coffee brewing in the old enamel pot on the stove. The sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon, but he was already up, planning to check the north fence before the heat set in. His wife, Evelyn, was fixing breakfast. Martin Hayes, his lifelong buddy and godfather to his late daughter, had shown up early, just like he used to. Nothing in the air hinted at betrayal. Out in the barn, as Roy saddled up Buck, his old sorrel horse, Martin offered to drive into town to pick up some supplies. Roy nodded, trusting him like a brother. Evelyn stepped out to say goodbye and gave Martin a long, lingering hug. Roy noticed it but said nothing. He figured it was just affection. He never imagined it was farewell. By noon, a shiny pickup rolled up the gravel drive, carrying 2 men in button-down shirts with papers in hand. They said they were there to execute a foreclosure. Roy laughed, thinking it had to be a mistake. But the documents were real. The deed, the mortgage, everything was in Evelyn's name. She had mortgaged the ranch without ever saying a word. He ran inside, heart pounding like a war drum, and found a letter on the bed. Evelyn's shaky handwriting read, "Forgive me, Roy. I didn't know how to tell you. Martin and I." It felt like someone had carved out his chest. The man he trusted most, the one he gave a roof when he had nothing, had taken his wife, and his entire life. The men started packing everything. They took the furniture, his tools, even the old photo of his parents. Roy didn't argue. He walked out to the hen house, gathered the 3 hens that were still laying, and slipped his sharpening knife into his leather pouch. The pain was immense, but his pride ran deeper. He wasn't about to cry in front of anyone. Buck stood waiting by the fence. Roy climbed into the wagon, gave one last look at the ranch he built with sweat and dreams, and sighed. Red, his old game rooster, leapt into the wagon and let out a long, mournful crow, a funeral cry for a life stolen. It was the end of one story, but maybe the beginning of another. With no direction but full dignity, Roy took the dirt road without looking back. People in town watched him go in silence. Some lowered their eyes, others tipped their hats. Everyone knew he was a good man. But being good doesn't always count. The world is harsh, and betrayal doesn't care how many barns you built. Roy, with his wagon, his rooster, and his horse, was now a ghost chasing a new purpose. That night, beneath a cottonwood tree, he ate cold beans and laid down in the dirt. Buck chewed on dry stalks. The hens nestled in rags. Red stood guard, eyes wide open. Roy looked up at the stars and muttered, "Tomorrow, I start over." He didn't know how or where. He only knew his soul wasn't done fighting. Dawn came with a dry wind and sky the color of ash. Roy stretched, his joints cracking from a night on hard ground. The hens clucked lazily, Red pecked at scattered corn, and Buck stood nearby, ears alert. There were no maps, no plans, no promises. Just a dirt road unraveling like a scar across the plains. The further he went, the heavier the sun pressed down. The wagon creaked with each turn of the wheels, a mournful song of tired wood. They passed prickly brush, rusted fences, and empty houses that hadn't seen laughter in years. Roy was looking for work, any work. He didn't care if it paid in coins or cornbread. Around midday, he reached a forgotten town called Dry Creek Junction. Barely a dozen buildings, a shuttered feed mill, and a sheriff napping in a broken lawn chair. Roy asked around, but no one was hiring. "We barely feed ourselves," said an old man with a frayed ball cap and sunken cheeks. Still, Roy didn't give up. He set up a small roadside stand near the general store. Fresh eggs, knife sharpening, fixing locks. A little sign written in charcoal on a scrap of wood. Most folks passed by. A few kids stopped to stare at Red, perched proud, like a statue on the wagon. On the second day, a woman approached. Worn eyes, apron dusted in flour. Her name was Martha Lee. "They say you know chickens," she said. "Mine are sick. I don't know what to do." Roy followed her to the edge of town, where a coop sat in the weeds. He cleaned it out, made a mix of vinegar, pepper, and ash, and checked each hen like they were his own. When he was done, Martha offered him cinnamon rolls and black coffee. It was his first warm meal in days. Word spread quick. A man who didn't beg, who worked without complaint. Folks began leaving blades to be sharpened, animals to be looked at. Roy didn't talk much, but the way he moved, calm, careful, kind, spoke louder than words ever could. Red became something of a legend among the children. He followed Roy everywhere, chased off stray dogs, and roosted like a soldier beside the wagon. The hens laid almost daily, as if grateful. Buck seemed younger somehow, like he too believed something good might come from all this pain. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Roy scribbled in his old notebook, "Maybe I didn't lose everything. Maybe I still have what matters." He hadn't forgotten Evelyn or Martin, but the anger had cooled. He'd learned that when you break inside, work and time are the only glue. And he still had plenty of both. Days passed, and Roy stopped being the stranger with the wagon. Around Dry Creek Junction, folks now called him the man with the rooster. His name traveled by word of mouth, from back porches to feed stores. Children trailed him down Main Street, men brought him broken tools, and women waved kindly from porch swings. Roy never asked for trust. He earned it just by being there. He still slept in his wagon under the big sycamore across from the old mill. Folks had offered him a spare room or a cot in a shed, but he always refused. "Long as I got Buck and Red, I got what I need," he'd say. But at night, under the moon, he'd write quietly in his journal. "Loneliness hurts less when it's chosen, not forced." One afternoon, a man rode into town on a sleek black mule, boots polished and smile crooked. Called himself Travis Rhodes. Claimed he owned land up north, though nobody knew him. He came from places where money bought respect, but Dry Creek wasn't like that. Especially not now, with Roy slowly becoming part of its soul. Travis didn't like what he saw. He started spreading rumors, said Roy was a liar, said the rooster was stolen, said no one really knew where he came from. His words were slow poison. Some began to wonder. Roy didn't defend himself. He just kept working. But that silence burned Travis more than any fight ever could. One day, Travis rolled into the town square with a massive, glossy rooster locked in a golden cage. "They say your bird's a legend," he shouted. "Let's see what he's made of." The crowd gathered. Roy stood up calmly, looked at Red, then at Travis. "My animals don't fight to prove a point," he said, turning away without a second glance. The crowd was stunned. Some saw courage. Others whispered, "Was he scared?" That night, Martha Lee stopped by. "Sometimes, Roy, being quiet isn't enough. If you don't stand for yourself, folks might forget you can." Roy nodded slowly. He hated drama, but he knew shadows grow if you let them. That same night, rocks hit his wagon. Eggs smashed. The hens scattered in panic. But Roy didn't run. He calmed his animals, fixed what he could, and sat beside Buck like always. "We didn't come to fight," he whispered. "We came to live." But something in his eyes had changed. The fire was starting to glow again. The town that had once embraced him now stood divided. Envy, like weeds, had started to spread. Roy knew he'd have to make a choice soon, keep quiet or speak up. And in that choice, he wouldn't just defend his place in Dry Creek. He'd defend his soul. The next morning, the sky was heavy with gray, like even the clouds knew something was coming. Roy rose early, checked on the hens, brushed Buck's coat, and strapped on his sharpening knife. He said nothing, but inside, something simmered. He wasn't the same man who had arrived weeks ago. The betrayal had planted a seed, and now it was growing into resolve. At the town market, folks avoided his eyes. Some looked away, others whispered behind hands. Only the kids came close, offering breadcrumbs to Red, who lifted his head proudly. Martha Lee handed Roy a tamale and a cup of strong coffee. She saw the storm in his face. "Travis doesn't deserve your silence," she said. Roy didn't answer, but he knew this time silence wouldn't be enough. That afternoon, Travis strolled into the square, all swagger and smirk, wearing a new white hat and dragging attention behind him. "So the Rooster King's hiding now, huh?" he barked. "Guess you only crow when no one's watching." His gold cage gleamed under the sun. "If you won't fight, you've already lost." The crowd watched in uneasy silence. Roy inhaled deep and did something no one expected. He climbed into his wagon, gently lifted Red into his arms like a war medal, and turned to the square. "This rooster doesn't fight for pride. He fights when there's reason. And you, Travis, you ain't reason enough." Then he stepped down and walked away. The plaza rippled with whispers. Some clapped. Others stayed quiet, unsure. Travis stood frozen, seething, but said nothing. That night, Roy found a message burned into the tarp of his wagon. "Leave before it's too late." A threat, as clear as morning frost. Martha Lee brought him a hot stew. "You need to watch your back, Roy. That man's dangerous." Roy nodded, not with fear, but with something deeper. "I'm not leaving. This land ain't mine. But my work's taken root here." She stared at him, finally seeing what had always been beneath the quiet. Roy Chandler didn't just have pride. He had grit. At sunrise, he found his wagon surrounded. Not by threats, but by neighbors. Men with tool belts. A young blacksmith. Martha Lee. One man stepped forward, eyes firm. "You're not alone, Roy. Dry Creek might be small, but we ain't cowards." Roy stood silently, hands clasped. He didn't speak, but his eyes shone with something rare, gratitude and strength. That night, Roy wrote just one line in his weathered notebook. "Silence brought me here, but maybe now it's time to speak with actions." He closed the book as Red let out a soft crow, and Buck shuffled nearby. And for the first time in a long while, Roy believed, not in second chances, but in earned ones. The day broke with a strange hum in the air. A wagon from out of town had arrived during the night, and folks were already whispering it brought legal trouble. Roy didn't pay it much mind, not until he saw Sheriff Darby walking straight toward him with a tight jaw and an envelope in hand. "Roy, I hate to do this," the sheriff muttered, eyes downcast. "But you've been served." The document accused Roy of trespassing on public land, disturbing the peace, and stirring civil unrest. "Signed by Travis Rhodes," Darby added. It was clear Travis wasn't done, he just changed tactics. The town was torn. Some folks chose silence, afraid of making waves. But others, led by Martha Lee and the young blacksmith, Tom, started organizing. "Roy never asked for anything," Martha said. "He worked. He helped. And now they want to toss him out like trash." Roy didn't argue. He kept tending sick chickens, sharpening knives, collecting eggs. He spoke through his hands, not his mouth. One afternoon, as he fixed a splintered gate behind the church, a little girl approached him, clutching a bleeding hen. "Daddy says you can fix anything," she whispered. Roy gently examined the bird. "I'll try," he said, and her face lit up like sunrise. The hearing was set for Saturday in the town square. On the day, folks gathered, not with anger, but with steady eyes and quiet hearts. Travis showed up in a press suit, documents in hand. Roy came with his patched-up shirt, a hat worn by time, and red in his arms. He didn't need to say much. The people spoke for him. One by one, they told stories of sharpened tools, cured animals, quiet help. Not a dollar asked in return. Just honest work. An old farmer raised his voice. "I saw him come here with nothing. But with that wagon, horse, and rooster, he built more than men with land in their name." Sheriff Darby listened. So did the town board. After a long pause, the sheriff stepped forward. "This town don't need more papers," he said. "It needs people who care." The charges were dropped. Roy was granted a community permit to stay by the old mill, not because of ownership, but because of earned trust. Travis stormed off without a word. Everyone knew this wasn't over. But for now, it was peace. That night, Roy opened his notebook and wrote, "Land isn't claimed with ink. It's claimed with respect." He closed it, patted Buck's neck, and smiled. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. The next morning, outside the wagon, Roy found a basket, fresh eggs, cornbread, and a note that read, "Thanks for staying." It wasn't wealth. But in that moment, it was worth more than gold. Because in Dry Creek Junction, he hadn't just found survival, he'd found a place to start again. The wind carried a strange weight that morning, like old dust being stirred from places long forgotten. Roy, unaware of what was coming, fed the hens and checked the wagon's axle. Buck chewed on dry weeds, and Red watched the horizon with that eerie stillness only animals have when they sense a shift. It was Martha Lee who spotted it first, a red pickup with out-of-state plates crawling down the dirt road into the square. When it parked by the old mill, a woman stepped out. Thin, tired, eyes sunken by regret. Roy's heart nearly stopped. It was Evelyn, the same woman who had shattered his life. But now, she wasn't alone. Holding her hand was a boy, no older than 6. Freckled, wide-eyed, holding a cloth chicken toy close to his chest. The town froze. Some turned away. Others stared, unsure what to feel. Roy didn't move. He just sat on his wooden bench and watched her approach. "I need to talk to you, Roy," she said quietly. He nodded and motioned toward a flat stone near the sycamore. Not the wagon. She understood the message. Sitting down, she told him everything, how Martin had abandoned her 3 years ago, taken what little they had left, and left her with nothing but a child in shame. "I heard there was a man here who heals animals and never turns anyone away," she said, tears welling. "When they said your name, I knew I had to come." The boy wandered toward Red and gently petted him. The rooster didn't flinch. Evelyn turned and whispered, "His name's Luke. He's your son, Roy." The world seemed to freeze. Roy closed his eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just breathed, as if learning to accept a truth deeper than pain. That night, Roy didn't write in his notebook. Instead, he made a small bed in the wagon for the boy, gave him warm cornbread with honey, and showed him how to feed the hens. Evelyn slept beneath the sycamore, just like Roy once had. There was no forgiveness. Not yet. But something softer than anger began to settle, maybe the first hint of hope. The town buzzed with whispers. Some supported him. Others didn't understand. But no one dared speak against him out loud. Roy had earned something rare, respect. And though his world was shifting again, this time, he wasn't alone. He had a son, a community, and perhaps a second chance he never asked for, but might just deserve. At dawn, Luke looked up at Roy and asked, "Can I stay with you?" Roy paused, placed a hand on the boy's messy hair, and answered with quiet strength, "If you want this to be your home, then it is." And in that moment, under the gold light of morning, something stronger than pain was born, a bond planted in honest soil. The folks in Dry Creek Junction no longer saw Roy Chandler walking alone. Beside him, always, was Luke, curious eyes, quick hands, and a quiet smile that made strangers soften. The kids started calling him Little Rooster because he never left Red's side. Whether at the market, the pasture, or Roy's makeshift workshop, the boy was there, learning everything with wide-eyed wonder. Luke picked things up fast. In days, he could tell a fertile egg from a dud, mix feed for buck without being told, and clean chicken feet without causing a squawk. Roy watched with quiet pride and fear. He'd never been a father. He didn't know how to be one. But he was learning that maybe this boy hadn't come to fill a hole, but to change everything. The townsfolk, once cautious, grew fond of Luke. The store clerks gave him apples. The older ladies knit him caps. The men taught him how to skip rocks and shoot marbles. When Luke laughed, the whole town felt warmer. And for the first time, Roy's tired eyes carried light again. But where there's light, shadows lurk. Travis Rhodes hadn't forgotten. He'd stayed quiet, waiting, watching. And when he saw Roy walking through town with a child, smiling, distracted, he knew the man now had something to lose, something to threaten, something to destroy. One afternoon, Luke vanished. Roy's heart raced. He found him crying behind the old mill, clutching a wrinkled piece of paper. In shaky pencil it read, "Tell your daddy I haven't forgotten anything." A warning, not just to Roy, but to the boy. That night, Roy sat with Martha Lee and Tom the blacksmith. "Maybe it's time I leave," he said. "I can't put him in danger." Martha slammed her hand on the table. "You walk away now, he wins. And this town loses its spine." Tom nodded. "We'll take shifts. If Rhodes comes close to that kid again, he'll regret it." Roy didn't sleep, but paced nervously. Red stayed low to the ground. The hens didn't make a sound. Even the wind held its breath. At dawn, Luke hugged Roy hard and whispered, "I don't want to leave. This is our home, right?" Roy swallowed and replied in a voice as steady as it was heavy, "Yes, son. And we're gonna defend it." That morning, Roy reached beneath the wagon seat and pulled out something he hadn't touched in years, a machete, polished and sharp. He strapped it to his belt. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. The time for running was over. If the past came knocking again, it would find him standing his ground. The sun rose hard that morning, fierce and golden, like it knew something big was coming. Dry Creek Junction was quiet, too quiet. The roosters crowed earlier than usual, and the wind kicked up dust that stung the eyes. Roy sharpened his machete at dawn. Not to use it, but to remind himself that the days of silence were over. Luke was playing near the sycamore with Red when the gunshot rang out. The town froze. A black pickup barreled into the square, tires spitting gravel. Travis Rhodes stepped out, flanked by two men with rifles slung low. Their eyes were cold. They didn't shout. They weren't there to scare anyone this time. They were there to finish something. "I gave you chances, old man," Travis spat, stepping toward the wagon. "Told you to pack up and go. But you just had to stay." Roy didn't flinch. He walked calmly to Luke, shielded him with his body, and stared Travis down. The look in Roy's eyes said it all. He'd already lost everything once. He wasn't losing again. One by one, townsfolk stepped out of their homes. First quietly, then with tools in hand. Tom the blacksmith, Martha Lee, store owners, kids, farmhands. Nobody shouted. They just stood, behind Roy, around the wagon, a living wall of resistance. Travis looked around. For the first time, his confidence cracked. He hadn't expected this. Not from these people. "If you touch my son," Roy said, voice deep and calm as a thunderstorm, "you'll see a man who's done running." He stepped forward. "This land ain't mine on paper, but it's mine in sweat, in work, in respect." Travis raised his gun, but one of his own men grabbed his arm. "Not worth it, boss," he muttered. "They'll tear us apart." You could feel the tension in the air like lightning ready to strike. Then, slowly, Travis lowered the gun, spat at the dirt. "This ain't over," he growled, climbing back into the truck. They sped away, leaving behind only dust and silence. But it was a holy silence, the kind that follows something sacred. Roy dropped to his knees. Not from fear, but relief. Luke ran to him, wrapping his arms around his waist. Buck neighed hard. Red crowed louder than he ever had, like he knew the war had ended without a single blade drawn. That night, the town didn't throw a party, but they gathered. There was stew, music, and candles lit by the old mill. Not to celebrate a fight, but to honor what was defended, the right to live in peace. Roy sat beneath the stars, writing one simple line in his notebook. "Today, I planted my life here, and no one pulled it up." The days after the standoff brought a quiet strength to Dry Creek Junction. Life settled back into its rhythm, roosters crowing, wagons rolling, hammers ringing. But something had changed. The fear was gone. In its place, a new feeling had taken root, belonging. Roy no longer slept in his wagon. The townsfolk, with their own hands, built him a small adobe cottage beside the old mill. No blueprints. No payment. Just gratitude, nails, and care. Luke painted chickens, stars, and horses on the walls. Every morning, he helped Roy feed the animals. Every evening, he practiced reading with Martha Lee. Roy had never been a man of many words. But now, in his quiet, he carried pride. Luke wasn't just his son, he was his reason. His future. His second chance. Red still ruled the town square. He no longer fought, but strutted like a general on patrol. Buck, though old, seemed more alive than ever. And the three hens laid faithfully. Luke named them Daisy, Peaches, and Ruth. It wasn't much, but it was a home. One afternoon, the sheriff called a town meeting under the big oak. He proposed something bold, adding Roy to the town council. "Not cause of votes," he said, "but cause of example." Roy tried to decline, until Luke pushed him forward and shouted, My dad doesn't give orders, but he sure gets things done. Laughter followed. And with it, unanimous approval. Evelyn stayed in town too, quietly helping at the church, cooking for the sick. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and Roy didn't chase reconciliation. They shared only nods. She had her place. He had his. But Luke had both his parents, each in their own way. That was enough. One morning, Luke came running. Dad! I found an old plot of land behind the hill. It's empty, but I think we can make it grow. Roy followed. The soil was tough, wild, but breathing. We don't need deeds to plant, he said. Just hands, hope, and time. Together, they started digging. Neighbors joined. Shovels hid dirt. Seeds of corn, squash, and beans filled the rows. Each furrow was a prayer. Each sunrise, a new chance. And each evening, Roy wrote in his journal, simple words, full of truth. In a forgotten corner of the country, where once he thought he'd die alone, Roy Chandler built something no court could seize, a legacy. Not of wealth or title, but of work, dignity, and roosters. Because the greatest men don't leave behind gold. They leave behind courage, and footsteps others can follow. They say the worst kind of loss is losing the place you once called home. But Roy Chandler learned that home isn't always acres or deeds. Sometimes it's an old wagon, a loyal horse, a rooster that crows when no one else dares, and a son who looks at you like you hung the moon. The betrayal nearly destroyed him, left him without land, without direction, without hope. But it also forced him to dig deep and find what he'd forgotten, the courage to start over. Without revenge, without hate, just with calloused hands, steady work, and a soul too stubborn to give up. Dry Creek Junction wasn't his by law, but it became his through sweat, respect, and love. And in a world that often forgets the quiet ones, Roy proved that dignity isn't loud. It just shows up every day and keeps going. Today, if you drive through that dusty little town tucked between forgotten hills, you might see a clay cottage near an old mill, hens scratching the dirt, a boy planting seeds beside a weathered man in a wide-brim hat, a rooster perched high, watching like a sentinel, and a horse, gray with age but proud. That's Roy Chandler's legacy, proof that even what's lost can be found again if you plant it with your heart. We have reached the end of our story. Leave your like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.